We can't see Him through the sin. He can see us, and He loves us. We choose not to see Him. And I wonder what we can do about that at Hillgrove Baptist Church. And we've been talking about a revival. And this is what Paul says about a revival. Therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy, pleasable, and acceptable to God. That's the first part of it. I would like to think we're trying to do that. Last week I talked about a fellow named Sisyphus. He was just a legend, but I wonder if that's not what we're like in a way. The fellow who liked to grab a hold of the rock and try to push it up the hill. And every time he came into the church, he would try to be a good Christian, but the second he left, he went back to his old ways. And he wondered why life was so hard. Maybe it's because we don't rely on the rock in the first place. The rock is Jesus Christ. And often we don't bother trying to change our lives. And there's a variety of reasons, but most times it's because we really don't think our lives can be changed in the first place. We often sit in the pews and think, this is the best it's ever going to get. This is the best for me. And since I'm such a sinner and the next person beside me is so righteous, guess what? I'm going to stay exactly where I am for the rest of my life. And that's not what Paul says. Paul says, do not be conformed anymore to the pattern of this world, but let yourself be transformed with Christ. I think we should do that every day. It's an ongoing process that should last your lifetime. And we asked a question last week. We said, how does a church go from 6 people to 46 in 2 years? Do you know any other church that's gone from 6 to 46? Very few. Most of them are going the opposite way, but we're starting to grow. And we asked the question, why? Got to know why so we can stay in the growth pattern. And the answer is, we're letting God transform our lives. We're starting to be obedient. We're starting to finally get it. And to realize it's all about Him, and not so much about us. It's about us serving Him. And that's why at the very end of the verse we said, for Hillgrove Baptist Church, we said, we want to do God's will. If I am getting rid of the sin out of my life with God's help, if I'm starting to allow Him to transform my life, I'll know His will. If I know His will, I'll start obeying His will. If I obey His will, I'll see the miracles. Paul, just a simple handkerchief, could heal somebody. Why isn't that all of us? We have the same gift. We have the same Holy Spirit. We have the same opportunities as Paul had, but we don't necessarily grab hold. That's what we're looking for. We want a revival here at Hillgrove, but the question is, how bad do we really want it, and what are we going to do to get it? And that's what I want to do. This time I want to talk about the practical side of revivals. The first thing we've got to realize, the soul is sick without God. And I do believe that. Reality is we are created in the image of God. In the innermost being, God knew us. He knit us together in our mother's womb. And in His life, you find every single breath we take, God controls. So what happens when I decide as a Christian to be rebellious? What happens when I decide to start walking backwards, away from God? What happens to my soul? It does start getting sick. We were meant for God. We were created for God. We were created to love God. And every time we walk backwards and take one more step towards the world and away from God, we do get sicker. We may not realize it, but when we sit in the pews and we're like Sisyphus, who just grabs a hold of the rock while we're in the church and try to push it, and we go out in the world and we sin all the more, we do get sicker every single day. Because ultimately, we're chasing the world. We do not glorify God. We do not serve Him. We serve the world instead of God the Creator. And that makes us sick and diseased. Because when you look into Scriptures, it says, for all things were created by Jesus Christ on heaven and earth, invisible, all thrones, powers, rulers, and authorities, all things were created by Him and for Him. All things are held together by Him. So when I walk away, what happens to me? I fall apart. We all fall apart. And there's a lot of people who sit in the church with genuine wounds, deep wounds, that they don't tell anybody about. They just sit in their pews and watch. And what a sad thing. There was a fellow, Augustine first talked about it, and then another fellow was talking about it. He said, you know, we come to the communion table, and he says, isn't it a shame that people are starving at the communion table? He wasn't talking about food. He was talking about spiritual life. People come to the church, and they're starving. They're looking for God, but not finding Him. And we've got to ask why. If we want a revival, we all have to be seeking God. I want to tell you a story. This one's hard to believe, but it is true. I am klutzy. I got no grace. I got no ability to walk around this beautiful maze up here without clipping all the guitars. I got nothing when it comes to walking. I walk in the open, and they let me walk in the open because I won't hurt anybody. My brother's just like it. He's exactly like me. He's bigger than I am, and he's more klutzy than I am. One day he came along and he decided he'd go out and help us make sap. And my older brother, he didn't like going small on things. He always wanted to go big. So there's no such thing as a lemonade stand. He wanted to make sap and sell it, and he thought he'd make millions. So my brother went out and said, I'm going to give him a hand. We used to call him FBI. And it's short for Firebug International. Because he just loved playing fire. Nothing he loved any better than grabbing the stick and twirling it in the air, watching the sparks fly everywhere. He thought that was awesome. The only problem is his klutziness overcame him. He tripped over his own 2 feet. And he landed in the sap. And his hands landed at the bottom of the pan and seared them. And when he pulled his hands up, he left part of his hands in the sap. Burned him. 3rd-degree burns. And then we told him to put him in the snow, which he screamed. He didn't like that too much, but it did help an awful lot. They went to the hospital. He got a whole bunch of gauze and a whole bunch of stuff around his hands. And they band-aided him. I got thinking about that. Isn't that what Christians are like? Don't we have a lot of band-aids in our lives? After all, when you're young, don't you, when you fall down and you scrape your knee, don't you come to Mom and Dad and say, it really, really hurts? And Mom comes up and puts a little band-aid on your knee, gives it a kiss, and you go, oh, it's all better, and you walk away. Is it really better? Is the wound still there? Absolutely. Does it still hurt? Sure it does. But we pretend it's not there anymore. And we're okay with that. Unfortunately, that's how Christians are. We have deep wounds. We have a wound that we'll never overcome without God. We're meant to be with Him. The closer we get to Him, the more in love we get with Him. The more the soul gets healed. But when we walk away, we do get sick. And the problem is, our solution to that is, let's put a band-aid on it and see if the pain might go away. We look for worldly solutions to what is really a spiritual problem. But we'll go out into the world and do the opposite of what Paul said. Instead of not being transformed by the world, we'll say, let's go out in the world and see if they got a solution to this gigantic hole that's in my heart. The hole really is because we're away from God. You're not going to find it in the world, but that's where we go to find the solution. I'm going to tell you a few stories about different kinds of sins. Different kinds of worldly solutions. It's not meant for anyone, but it's meant for everyone. So if you feel I'm convicting you, well, good for that. But I didn't have you in mind at all. I have nobody in mind, but I have everybody in mind. Because every one of these sins, today's culture says, 2 thumbs up, they're okay, go and do them. So let's start off with one of them. And this is one that the world says is really big. That's drugs. If I feel pain, drugs are probably the very best way that I can think of getting rid of that pain according to worldly standards. The world says, well, if you take enough drugs, you won't feel that pain anymore. That empty feeling of being away from God, you just feel pleasure. To a certain extent, that is true. When you look at it, short-term benefits of taking any kind of drugs is something called dopamine. As soon as you take a drug, a chemical gets released in the brain. It's dopamine. And what it does is it takes all the neurons within the body that feel pain, dulls them. That's step number 1. That's awesome. That gets rid of your pain. Then it goes to the other neurons that feel pleasure. And it excites those. And now you're feeling really good about life. Feelings of well-being, euphoria, confidence, pain reduction, all things that drugs will give you short-term. And they do feel like a really good band-aid. They really do. But the problem is there's long-term consequences to taking drugs. Brain damage, high blood pressure, bowel gangrene, liver and colon cancer, just to mention a few of them. Drugs can kill you. In the long run, what happens is you take a drug, and now these areas in here, if you look, anything in the yellow, that's all the soft drugs. That's all the drugs that Satan tells you, they're not going to really hurt you. Does alcohol hurt you? Some people say, doctors say, and not just a little bit of alcohol is good for you. That's certainly true. But that's not what we take. It's just a little bit of alcohol. We take a whole pile of alcohol. You'll find that medical people also say marijuana, awesome for you. It doesn't hurt you, doesn't harm you, you can't get addicted to it. It's one of the best drugs you can take. That's not true. Not even close. Actually, marijuana causes bowel gangrene. Marijuana also causes cancer. Marijuana, unlike what some people think, is exceptionally addictive. If you take it for the long term, you will notice the person on marijuana. Just look in their eyes. They'll have a very dopey look to their eyes. That's because their short-term memory has been obliterated. They can't remember anything short-term anymore. And their brain doesn't react very fast anymore because the drugs has dulled them. from the tip of their toes to the top of their head. They just don't feel anything anymore. And the bad part about drugs is, once you start taking them, you can't stop taking them. After you get addicted to them, the body craves it. And you've got to take them over and over again just to get rid of the pain. Forget about the pleasure because you're not getting it. All you get is pain from drugs. Now, marijuana. I want to deal with that one because you know what? Marijuana is the #1 entrance drug to cocaine and heroin. #1. You start out with marijuana thinking everything's awesome. Next thing you know it, you got to take cocaine in order to feel the same way you do with marijuana. That's a band-aid solution. And it really doesn't work out very well. I get the right one here now. Might have to get Rob to give you a hand. I need a pin.
Not really. If you start doing it, you're going to want to do it. You're going to end up doing it either way.
Aye. That's great.
Yeah, no.
You need a better address.
I'll get you back in a second. All right, that looks weird, but yes.